starting now. Great. Thank you all so much for being here today for our second Taos lecture of the year. And we are extraordinarily blessed to have Jim Shneer here teaching about the Jewish calendar demystified. I don't know if you've had the pleasure of reading his book, Demystifying the Jewish Calendar, or actually the Jewish Calendar and the Torah, it's called, isn't it?
It is. We're only doing the first half tonight.
Wonderful. Yes, because we're going to have a second part that will be coming out next year in the fall. As soon as we have our calendar meeting, we'll be able to let you all know when that's going to be. And I know we're going to be looking forward to that after tonight. But Jim is an author and a lecturer who specializes in a variety of subjects, from the details of Jewish calendars to the histories of famous naval ships and military fortifications. He was an aerospace engineering manager before he found his passion for research, writing, and public speaking. And we were so delighted when Jim said, you know what, I'd love to offer one of these Taos lectures, and how blessed we are to have you here today, giving us more insight into this very complicated Jewish calendar that we are blessed to have. So thank you so much, Jim.
Thank you, Rabbi, and welcome everybody. Thank you for being here. We're going to spend most of the evening talking about the Jewish calendar, but I really want to start by introducing calendars in general. Now, I'm sure all of you think you know what a calendar is, but if you were to actually try to define it, I think you would have a bit of a problem. So here's the my definition of a calendar. It's actually based on a definition in the Naval Almanac. So I think we all can agree that a calendar is a man-made device, and it's for measuring longer periods of time, months, years, weeks, but weeks is a little bit different kind of an animal. It uses whole numbers of days. Calendars don't use fractional days, as you well know, to approximate the average value of astronomical events. Now, what does that mean? Well, if you take a look at this graph, you can see that from month to month, the period from new moon to new moon varies from about 29.8 days to 29.3 days. And this is from month to month. So it's not constant. But what is constant is this line here. It's constant and it's flat. And what that means is the average of these events over a very long period of time is the same. And that's kind of what makes calendars work. And the same thing happens for the sun as well. So those are the average values of astronomical events. Now, these events don't occur on whole day boundaries. They're fractions of days. The moon average is about 29.53. We'll see that on the next chart. So now the definition kind of makes sense. So the calendar is always approximating something that it can't get exactly right. A couple of more definitions. The mean synodic month, and you'll see me using the letters MSM throughout the talk, is the average time between new moons. You see the number there. And that's sort of the gold standard for measuring the length of a month. That's the astronomical value that's used today. In the future, it will get slightly shorter, but that's way out. Similarly, for the sun, we have the vernal equinoctial year, which I will call the VEY from now on. And this is basically the time for the sun to return to the spring equinox. That's the gold standard for measuring the length of a year. And the epoch is the term that denotes the date and time when a calendar began. And that's important because that brings in the religious component of calendars. Most modern calendars have some religious connection. I think the only one that's reasonably well known that does not is the Chinese calendar, which I think has the epoch as the birth date of one of their emperors. So a quick look. The Muslim calendar uses Friday, July 16th of 622 of the Common Era. What's that? That's the day that Muhammad fled from Mecca to Medina. That's where their calendar starts. The Julian calendar, which is still used by the Orthodox Church, Julius Caesar set the epoch at 45 BCE. That's when he started it. The Christians in the 5th century kind of co-opted it, figured out as best as they could when they thought Jesus was born. They didn't get it quite right, but it really doesn't matter in this case. So that's the Orthodox calendar, which was used in parts of the world up until the early 20th century. The Soviets changed the calendar in 1918. The Imperial Russia used the Orthodox calendar. The civil or Gregorian calendar, that's the one we use today. It's in use all over the world as the standard calendar for business and pretty much everything. And I'll use the term civil and Gregorian interchangeably. The epoch of that calendar was Friday the 15th, 1582, when Pope Gregory XIII issued a papal bull called the Inter Gravissimus, where he essentially removed 10 days from October. It went from October 4th to October 15th. Why did he do that? Because it became apparent to the Catholic Church that Easter was getting earlier and earlier using the old calendar. And by 1582, it was 10 days off, which means Easter was occurring very, very early. And so he changed the calendar. It's easy for the Pope to do. And of course, all the immediately. The Protestants, not so much, because it was the Catholics that did it. So it took the Protestant countries a long time to do that. The British Empire changed their calendar in 1752 from the Julian to the Gregorian. And I know in grade school, I was taught that George Washington was born on February 22nd, 1732. Well, his mother didn't think so, because when he was born, the calendar hanging in her cabinet would have said February 11th, 1731. And there's a reason. It was a complicated changeover. Jewish calendar. The Jewish calendar's epoch is the date you see there. And that's basically when the Jews reckoned that the creation took place almost. The creation actually takes place in Elul of the year 1. So year 1 existed before creation for a while. And that's the time that, according to the oral tradition, and the people who had to marry religion and astronomy made it happen. Give you an idea of various looks at the creation story. Some of these are biblical based, some of them are not. Obviously, the ones from India are not. But there's a wide variety of dates. And probably the two reasons that there's such a wide variety, or two, maybe there are more that I have not thought of. One is interpretation of the biblical texts, because what these people did is they said, this guy lived 900 years, this guy lived 400 years, this king reigned so many years. They strung them all together, worked back from the time when they lived, and came up with the date of creation. So one problem was interpreting the Bible in its original language. Then you had people looking at the Latin translations, the Greek translations. So now you have two kinds of ambiguity. Ambiguity in the original text and ambiguity inserted by the translator's interpretations of it. One of the more famous ones, Christian ones, is this one, which was done in, I think this was done in 1763 by Bishop Ussher. Anyway, so the epoch of the Jewish calendar is slightly before creation. Okay. There are three major kinds of calendars in use today: the solar, the lunar, and the lunisolar. Lunisolar. We're going to look at the solar calendar first because that's what we're most used to. It's our civil calendar. So the civil calendar attempts to align itself with the VEY. It ignores where the moon is. It's trying to marry itself very accurately with the sun. Doesn't care about the position of the moon. And I'm not going to go through all the numbers all the time, but this is kind of the way it looks like. You all know this. In a 400-year cycle, which is what the Gregorian calendar does, there are 303 common years and 97 leap years. If you multiply this number out, common year times 303 years, 97 leap years times 366 days, you add them all up, you get this number. If you look at 400 VEYs, you get this number. That's an error of only 0.124 days every 400 years, or about a day every 3,200 years. So that's a pretty darn good calendar. It does what it's supposed to be doing. And the other important thing is that the changes that were made by Gregory the 13th are easy to understand. It wasn't a complicated change at all. Now, I was saying it does not attempt to align it the beginning of the month with the moon. Here are 2 years of new moons, 2021, 2022. Notice the new moon occurs anywhere in the month. And quite curiously, next year, January has 2 new moons, February doesn't have any, and March has 2 new moons. So clearly our civil calendar doesn't care what's going on in this realm. Let's look at the lunar calendar. It's the opposite. It attempts to synchronize the month with the MSM. It ignores where the sun is. The Islamic calendar is a case of that sort. There are 354 days in a common year for them, and the leap year has 1 more. But you notice 354 days is 11 days short of where the sun is in the sky. So as a lunar calendar, it's very accurate. But as a solar calendar, it's 11 days off. And in fact, devout Muslims don't even use the computational calendar. There are actually organizations in the Muslim community that look for the first appearance of the lunar crescent. So this is the Islamic year. This is 1442. It started on August 20th. And recognize that because the lunar calendar is short, it's creeping up on the Gregorian calendar, and we'll catch up with it on that date. The 2 years will be the same. That'll be the Muslim year, 2874, and the Gregorian year. I ain't going to be around for that, but, and by the way, this whole talk presumes that these calendars don't change. As you'll see as we go on, they eventually will have to. More later. The lunisolar calendar attempts to synchronize both of them. The Chinese calendar is a good example. The Jewish calendar is a good example. And the Jewish calendar is based on the Babylonian calendar. The belief is that when the Jews returned to Israel after the Babylonian exile, they brought the Babylonian calendar with them. And the strongest evidence is the names and durations of the months. Here are the Babylonian names. Here are the Jewish names. And the Jews had a nice, simple lunar calendar. As you will see, that was not to last. Okay, some info about the Jewish calendar. A day is 24 hours long. That's helpful. The Jewish hour is divided into 1,080 parts, or shalachim. I will use the word parts for the duration of this, unless I forget. And a halak is equal to 3 1/3 seconds. Now, what I call the Jewish ecclesiastical month, which is called the Molad, is this number. 29 days, 12 hours, and 793 parts, or this many days. The error with the MSM is very, very small. So the Molad is accurate for a very, very long time. And this value actually was taken by the Jews from earlier works. It wasn't a number that Jewish astronomers came up with. The term Molad is also used to mean the day of the week and the time of the day when the Molad occurs. So you'll hear the expression, the Molad of Tishrei. And that's when the new moon occurs based on the Molad calculation. Also, as you probably know, the Jewish calendar begins at 6 p.m. the previous evening, as does the Jewish month. Okay. What we're going to show here is something called the Metonic cycle. It happens to be that 235 MSMs is almost exactly equal to 19 VEYs. And that's kind of what makes the calendar work. So let's compare the two. If we multiply the number of MSM, the number of MSMs times the MSM, we get this number of days. And if we multiply 19 times the VEY, we get this number of days. So the error between the two is just under 1/10 of a day every 19 years. Now, the Jewish calendar tries to do the same thing. And it does by having 12 years of 12 months. We multiply 144. Now we're using the Molad, which is our version of the MSM. We come up with this number. We then have 7 years, 7 and 12 is 19, of 13 months. That's 91 times the Molad. We get this number. Adding these two together, we get this number. We compare this with 92 real years, and we get an error of very close to the same error as we did with the astronomical values. Now, let's talk about the leap years. So as we saw from the previous chart, there's 7 leap years in every 19 years. They happen to be years 3, 6, 7, 8, 11, 14, and 17, and 19 in a 19-year cycle. These are the same numbers that the Babylonians used, although over the course of time, different communities chose a different 7 years within the 19-year period. Now, if you're ever at a cocktail party and want to wow people with your knowledge of the Jewish calendar, you can walk over to a piano keyboard or take your piano keyboard that's on your phone with your piano keyboard app and show them this. If you start with the C on any octave on the piano and number the keys and the cracks from 1 to 19, as I've shown in the diagram, then the leap years are the cracks and the keys are the common years. I'm sure something you will use in your daily lives. Okay, so how are some ways of determining what the leap years are? Well, let's take the current year. If you divide the current year by 19, and by the way, since the beginning of our years for the next 20 years begins with 57, there's no remainder. So you really only have to look at the last two digits. If you divide 19 into 81, you get a remainder of 5, which tells you that it's the 5th year in the 19-year cycle. And it's not a leap year because you know the leap years are 3, 6, 8, and so on, as shown in red. Supposing you don't remember what the leap years are, then it's a little bit higher calculation, a little bit more complex, I should say. If you were to multiply 7 times the Jewish year, add 1, and divide it by 19, if the remainder is less than 7, it's a regular year. If it's less than 7, it's a leap year. Okay. Leap years, at least in the near term between those 2 years, 1871 till 2117, the following is true. You look at a calendar, if Rosh Hashanah begins before September 16th, the new year will be a leap year. And there were 86 of those in the period I've shown up at the top of the chart. If it's after if it's after September 16th, the new year is a common year, and there were 153 of those in that interval. On September 16th, you're out of business because it'd be either one. And the next September 16th is in 2023, and I believe that is a leap year, as it turns out. So anyway, this is actually very handy, because from this alone, you can tell whether the coming Jewish year is a leap year. Now, as you will see after 2017, that doesn't work anymore, and we'll learn why. Now, the Jews took the Babylonian calendar, and the 4 postponements were developed. The Hebrew word is yachiyot. And we will go through them one by one to understand why they're needed and why they work. What the first one says is if the Molad of Tishrei occurs afternoon, basically 18 hours, remember, is noon, because the calendar starts at 6 o'clock the previous evening. Then Tishrei 1 is postponed 1 day. And what that means is that it ensures that the new moon doesn't fall late. The second one, I think it's the most interesting, is that Rosh Hashanah never occurs on a Wednesday or a Friday or a Sunday for religious reasons. If Rosh Hashanah occurred on a Wednesday, Yom Kippur would fall on a Friday, and you couldn't prepare for Shabbat. If it occurred on a Friday, you could prepare for Shabbat, which would be the following day. And if it occurred on Sunday, Hoshana Rabbah would fall on a Saturday, and the ceremony of the willows would not be permitted. So if the Molad of Tishrei occurs on one of those days, Tishrei 1 is postponed one day. What that means is Rosh Hashanah can only occur on a Monday, a Tuesday, a Thursday, or a Saturday. Now, these last two were developed to keep the number of different kinds of Jewish years smaller than they were. They got it down to 6 instead of 8. I'm not going to go through these in detail, but you can see here, this is the longest common year, and this is the shortest leap year. So let's walk through an example. We're going to take this year, 5781. The Molad was on Thursday at 20 hours and 701 parts. The easiest way to do this is to do rule 3 first. If all of the conditions below are met, Rosh Hashanah is postponed 2 days, and you're done. We start through these, and the first question is no. The Molad wasn't on a Tuesday, we move on. If all 3 conditions below are met, Rosh Hashanah is postponed 1 day, and none of the other conditions are considered, and the answer to the first question is no. Now we do rule 1. Is the Molad on or after the 18th hour? And the answer is yes. There's 20 hours. So yes, we postponed 1 day, but now it's a Friday. So we postpone it again, and we're done. And finally, if the Molad, as we said back at the beginning, if it occurs on these days, you postpone it. Anyway, we determined here after the postponement that Rosh Hashanah fell on a Saturday. If you want to look at your calendar, you will see that indeed it did. So this is kind of the way these postponements work. So there are 3 different lengths of common years, as you can see there, and 3 different lengths of leap years. So you would think, since the year can start on 4 different days and there's 6 different kinds of years, that there would be 24 configurations. That turns out not to be true. And only these 14 actually occur. Common years, which are either deficient. I use the term for these years deficient. Other calendarists use different terminology. I use deficient, regular, and abundant for these 3. And again, for the short, medium, and long for these 3. And these are the only start days that these kinds of years can occur. So if a year starts on a Monday, you know it can't be a common year. It can't be a regular year, period. And a leap year of 384 days only starts on a Tuesday. Okay, so here's the whole Megillah on 1 sheet of paper. You have the common years, the leap years, the months. The yellow squares are months with 30 days. The blue are ones with 29 days. And the way you get from a defective year to a regular year is by adding a date at the end of Kislev. And the way you get to an abundant year is by adding a date to the end of Cheshvan and a date of Kislev. So that's how we get from defective, regular, and abundant for both kinds of calendars. Now, what about a leap year? I thought I'd throw this term at you, an embolismic month. If you insert something to improve the accuracy of a calendar, like February 29th, or like Adar 2, the calendar term for it is embolismic. So what happens in a leap year? Essentially, Adar slides down here, and it takes all of its holidays with it, like Purim, for example. And then a 30-day month is inserted here. This is called Adar 1, and this is called Adar 2. So now we have the leap year, the defective leap year, the regular leap year, and the abundant leap year. This is the basic calendar story. Now we're going to move on to some other interesting aspects of the calendar. How about the holidays? Well, the holidays in red are the biblical holidays. And since Rosh Hashanah basically can only occur on 4 days, and since there are no calendar changes in this period, if you know when Purim or Passover, what day they occur on, you will be guaranteed of knowing when these other holidays occur. If Purim occurs on a Sunday, Yom Kippur will occur on a Saturday. If Passover occurs on a Thursday, Rosh Hashanah will occur on a Saturday. Because this part of the year is not affected by any of the calendar alterations. They're all at the beginning of the year. The other curiosity is that from the first day of Passover to the 8th day of Sukkot is 185 days, which is the number of days between the two equinoxes. It turns out the most powerful way to calculate when Rosh Hashanah will occur was developed by the mathematician Gauss, and he did it by calculating Passover and then adding days forward to get it to Yom Kippur. His algorithm basically calculates Passover. Okay, the Jewish calendar cycle. If you remember, a couple of charts ago, we said that the Gregorian calendar repeated every 400 years. Well, the Jewish calendar repeats every 689,472 years. And why is it so long? Well, here's the reason. The Molad of Tishrei of year 1, which was the first year of a 19-year cycle, occurred on day 2, hour 5, and 504 parts. We saw that on an earlier chart when I was talking about the epoch. The new calendar cycle occurs when the Molad of Tishrei of the first year of the new cycle occurs exactly at this time, and it's the first year of a 19-year cycle. Now, it turns out this number shows up 3 times in that interval, but it shows up as Tishrei 1 of years that aren't the first year of a 19-year cycle. Now, I'm not going to go through this story, but basically what this says is the Molad slips this much, this many parts, exceeds a full week by this many parts. And you have to keep adding these and adding these and adding these until you get to a full week again. That's what this story says here. If we have time, we can come back to it, or if somebody's interested, I'll come back to it. But I'm going to move on for now. Oh, that was a previous version. Okay, now that we know how many years there are in a cycle, we can look to see how many different times the different kinds of years occur. So what this says here is, this number, by the way, here is 689,472. That's 100%. So roughly a third of the time, the year starts on, Rosh Hashanah occurs on a Thursday. The year starts on a Thursday. And the year type that occurs most frequently is a common abundant year. Deficient common years occur very infrequently, the ones that start on Saturday. And this one is the most frequent. So these are what the numbers look like. As you can see, the probability of Rosh Hashanah falling on a Tuesday is about 11%. Now, it turns out that if Rosh Hashanah occurs on a Tuesday, first day of Passover will occur on a Sunday. So the chance of Easter and Passover falling on the same day from the get-go is only 1 in 10. And since Easter is using a different calculation, the chances of them occurring on the same day is remote. It does happen, but not very often. Okay, so let's go back, take a quick look at the postponements. Now that we've got this other information in hand. So here are the 4 kinds of postponements. 39% of Jewish years are not postponed. 47% are postponed by 1 day, 14% 2 days. So the year is postponed 61% of the times, and here's the breakout going this way. And you can see these calendar correction ones occur very infrequently. This one in particular, Rule 4. Okay, now we're going to come back and look at some more about 19-year cycles. You may recall, or you may not, that 19 years equals this many days. But since a calendar only can count days, the number of days in a 19-year period has got to be some number close to it. And as it turns out, 19-year cycles can be any of these 4 numbers of days long, 19 years. And the pattern is determined by the first year in the cycle. I'll show you patterns on the next page. There are 36,000 19-year cycles in the 689,000 years. And the calendarists at the early part of the 20th century proved that there are exactly 61 patterns of 19-year cycles. This is the way they're distributed. Number of days, number of patterns, only one of this type. The number of cycles, remember there are 36,000 cycles. So very small number, less than 1% of the cycles are 6,942 days. Here are what these cycles look like. I'll tell you in a minute which cycle we're in right now. So here's a 6940. This happens to be pattern number 4. And these are the numbers that his name was Sherrod Burnaby. These were the numbers he used to define the patterns. And here's an example of one each. Here's the 6,942 day pattern. And what the pattern is that you've got, obviously common years and leap years are fixed, but the deficient, regular, and abundant are all changing throughout here. So you would intuitively think there would be a lot more than 61 patterns, but Burnaby proved there cannot be. And again, the pattern that you're in is determined by the molad of Tishrei of year 1 of the cycle. We are in cycle number 305. Now, how do I know that? I go down here, I divide this by 19 and I get 305. So there have been 305 since the epoch. There have been 305, 19 cycles. So here's the Jewish year. Here's the civil year. Here we are now. We're in a common deficient year. And we already know it started on Saturday because we learned that a couple of charts back. So this is what the current cycle looks like. And this happens to be the fourth cycle of the 61. Okay, the correlation between the Jewish calendar and astronomy. The Jewish year is this many days. We learned that back on an earlier chart. It's done by taking the molad, multiplying it by 235, dividing it by 19. That's a Jewish year. A VEY is this number of years. The difference is 606.4 minutes a year, which turns into this, so that the Jewish calendar advances about 1 day against the sun time every 225 years. In a similar fashion, comparing the Jewish calendar with the civil calendar, we have these two numbers. The difference is this. And this turns into 231 days with respect to the civil calendar. What that means is that in 84,000 some odd years, the Jewish calendar will overshot one whole year from the civil calendar and be back to where it started. So the Jewish calendar is getting further and further apart from the civil calendar, never mind the sun. So here's what's happening because of that. Right now, Rosh Hashanah cannot occur before September 5th. The last time it occurred was here. The next one is here. And the next one is in about 84,000 years. The last time Rosh Hashanah occurred on September 4th was back in 5527. Right now, Rosh Hashanah cannot occur after October 5th. The previous time was 1967. The next time is 2043. The first time Rosh Hashanah occurs on October 6th, 2214. And at that time, the separation date, which we talked about at the beginning, the civil calendar date that separates the Jewish leap years from the Jewish common years, moves from September 16th to September 17th. So that's what's happening in the short term. In the long term, let's look what's happening. Hanukkah begins on the 25th of Kislev. Here we have 5 successive Jewish years. Here we have their civil year counterparts, and whoops, 3031 doesn't have a Hanukkah. 3032 has 2 of them because Hanukkah slipped into this year. And then it continues okay for a while, but then you start seeing Hanukkah get skipped more and more often, and that will continue. Rosh Hashanah, you have to wait longer for Rosh Hashanah because it's further from New Year's, from January 1st. So here are 3 Tishrei ones of 3 Jewish years. 3761, December 12th. Notice Rosh Hashanah is in December now. 22,202, no Rosh Hashanah. 2203, 3760, 2203, 37. Now, the reason I've circled these, so you're sitting in synagogue, not looking at your book, and you're thinking, what's next Jewish year going to be? So you add 3,761 to the civil calendar year and you get the new Jewish year. Right there is when it ends. You can't do that anymore because the Jewish year is approaching the civil year very gradually. Remember, we saw back the Muslim year caught up with the civil calendar in the year 20,000. Well, wait for this. If you want to wait that long, Tishrei 1 and January 2nd will be the same year on both calendars. Okay, we're almost done, but the numbers are going to keep getting bigger, I promise. Actually, after this chart. You folks maybe remember that in 2013, Hanukkah and Thanksgiving created the holiday of Thanksgiving. Well, the first time that occurred was in 1888. Thanksgiving actually became not an official federal holiday, but Lincoln basically proclaimed that everybody who was celebrating Thanksgiving at different times in November should all do it on the last Thursday of November. So at that time, Thanksgiving was the 5th Thursday in November, and that was the first occurrence of Thanksgiving. The second was a few years ago, and the third is in 77,000 years. Now, 2 more charts, I think. Can the Jewish calendar be improved? Yes. I think I'm going to not go through the details here. This is a relatively easy way to make the Jewish calendar very, very accurate. You can see the error goes from this to this. Now, none of these calendars account for the fact that the MSM and the VEY are changing. And the guy who invented this calendar actually has a molad which changes periodically, so it keeps the calendar extraordinarily accurate. From my perspective, the only way this is going to happen, and Rabbi, you may want to comment on this, it seems to me the only group that could do this if the Great Sanhedrin were reconvened and said, yea, verily, we cannot have Passover occurring in December. It's just not the right agriculture going on. And I think that'll eventually have to happen when the holidays get too far off. Okay, last chart. So we saw this. We saw this. When do the two coincide? 14, what is that, trillion years, or 5 quintillion days, I guess. And actually, this is my get off the stage chart. That's the book that you got the flyer on. And we already talked about it because I was going to use this chart to say that the title of the book talks about the Torah. And we didn't talk about the Torah today. And that's because the interplay between Torah readings and when they occur and the calendar is fairly complex. There are a different number of weeks in the Jewish year. There are special Shabbatot where you skip a parsha, which can vary 2 in some years to 5 in other years. And the rule is you have to say all 54 parshiot within the Torah reading cycle, which goes from Simchat Torah to Simchat Torah. So hopefully we'll do this again in the fall. And now I'm available for questions.
Yeah, I have a question.
Hold on
Wait a
just
minute.
1 second, Michael. So what I didn't
I'm
say at the
sorry.
very beginning, no, this was actually my fault. What I didn't say at the very beginning is that we wanted to encourage everyone to write questions in the chat. And once we've gone through the questions in the chat, then we're going to open it up to any questions that anyone wants to give. So you'll be able to have your question answered, Michael. We love that you have questions. And we're so fortunate because Diane has volunteered as Jim's trusty sidekick to monitor the questions. So thank you so much, Diane.
Sure. First question from Marla. What is meant by once in a blue moon?
Did I talk about that?
No. Do you know?
I did, but I don't remember at the moment.
Anybody?
I don't remember.
When you have 2 new moons in the same month.
Okay, that sounds right.
Thank you, Jack. Okay, next question. Are all the calculations for the years already determined? Who does or did these calculations? Who is in charge of the calendar?
The calculations have been done by, I guess I don't want to say any one individual is in charge. Basically, the calendar was codified by Maimonides, and what he set forth, well, he wrote it all down in one place. And in fact, the last thing that was agreed to was actually the epic year, because different Jewish communities read the Bible differently, and the years were a few years apart. Since then, everybody has followed the same computational rules, and now with computers and the internet, and basically Gauss's algorithm, I hadn't thought about it this way, Gauss's algorithm took Maimonides' text and turned it into math so that you could use computers to generate this stuff.
Okay, next from Jessica. Isn't Purim an apocryphal, not biblical holiday?
Well, it depends what you call the Bible. To me, the Bible is the Tanakh, and it's in the Tanakh, the book of Esther. It's not in the Torah, but it's in, when I use the term biblical, I should have used Tanakh. Oh, well. Sorry, Jessica.
Next time you'll know better.
What was that?
Next time she'll know better. So from Rabbi Cassie, this year.
Hold on, let me stop screen sharing so I can see everybody. Stop screen sharing. I think I am unshared.
What is this?
I took care of it for you.
There we go. Now I can see people.
From Jessica, it's not in the Tanakh.
It isn't?
That's what Jessica's. Jessica, you want to talk about that?
Rabbi, you want to talk about that?
Technically, that is absolutely true. It's not in the Tanakh, it's in later texts. I mean, yeah, she has no microphone, so she can't speak for herself, but it
okay,
definitely
cool.
is part of our Jewish tradition. There's no doubt about that.
And it follows the biblical rules, as it turns out.
Tradition, right. So now we got some good ones. From Gail Reuter, what did they do before computers?
Well, if you go back far enough, these were observational calendars. Basically, they looked for the beginning of the new moon, and they declared it to be the beginning of a month. And I'm oversimplifying this also, because if you look at the rules for Rosh Chodesh, you get the idea of some of the complexities of even doing that. And they had figured out every 2 or 3 years, the crops weren't occurring in the right month, so they'd add a month. And so all this was done observationally, and basically in the first millennia, the calendar became more and more computational and less observational. The calendar that we are using today, except for the actual value of the epoch, was pretty well completed by the 9th or 10th century. there is an Arabic writer by the name of Al-Biruni, who in his book, and I've actually quoted a piece of his book in my calendar book, I've lifted out his text where he talks about the Jewish holidays. He's got all the rules, exactly the way we do them today. And he was writing at least 100 years before Maimonides.
Next question is from Michael, and I want him to read this himself because it's a really good one. Michael, unmute.
Okay, I'm not on the screen, but I said, if they is 365.24 days, what the hell is oy vey?
Michael, thank you for sharing.
That was good. You made my day, Michael. From Roz, you said that Shabbat starts at 6 p.m. What about sundown?
Good question. Okay. From a computational perspective, it starts at 6 p.m. From a religious perspective, it starts when 3 stars are visible. I guess some sources say when 3 second magnitude stars are visible, but that's pretty tough to determine unless you know where the second magnitude stars are. So I think the conventional wisdom is just 3 stars. And well, in a sense, it's just like the Muslims do it with the moon. There's the computational calendar, and then there's the observational calendar, which the devout use to determine what each one is calculating, what each one is looking at.
Of course, I never figured out when it was cloudy what they would do.
When it was what, cloudy?
Yeah.
Well, clouds used to be a problem declaring the new month. And if there was a cloudy day, they had rules for what to do. They would with the postponement or not. So yeah, that was a real problem. And there were rules that took care of it. And they would say, I mean, if it was cloudy for a week, yeah, who knew? By the way, I should comment, which was really wasn't part of the talk. You know, we talked about months and years because these are astronomical events. The week is not. The week is a man-made entity, which is believed to have been the ancients' approximation of 1/4 of a month. That's why we have a 7-day week. That's not known for a fact. That's just a conjecture.
Okay. Next question. Why does the Muslim calendar have no leap corrections?
It does. I don't remember which chart it was on. It'd be hard for me to get back to, but it does. It's got 29-day months and it's got 30-day months. And they pretty much alternate. And then their leap years has 1 extra day. So you have 354-day years and 355-day years. So yeah, they do.
Rabbi, why don't you read yours?
Sorry, mine is a little more complicated, and I don't know if it has any effect on our calendar or not, but I was reading recently about the theological problems that especially the Christian world, but really a lot of the world had with the number 0. And therefore there was no 0 year, right? It went from 1 BCE to 1 CE. And I was curious if there was any sort of an implication on our calendar, or if there's any other theological or superstitious mumbo jumbo that kind of factors into our calendar.
Well, the answer, it doesn't affect our calendar. So that's the easy part of the answer. The hard part of the answer is there's something called an astronomical calendar. The astronomers wanted a year 0, so they put a year 0 into their calendar. So their year 0 is -1 BCE on the civil calendar. And the reason the year 0 never exists, I mean, the reason there is no year 0 in the civil calendar is because 0 didn't exist when the Julian calendar was created, or even when the Christians co-opted it. The invention of zero was much later. But the answer to your question is basically no.
That's it for the questions. So we can open up. Anybody else have any more questions?
I wore everybody out.
Lot to think about.
Well, let's say this. If you decide to, if we do it next year for the Torah, and you decide to come back, we'll spend the first 5 minutes with the quiz on today's material. How's that?
You expect us all to come back after that?
Probably not after that. Not after that threat.
It's all here.
Jim, only if the quiz is for credit.
What kind of credit would you like?
That I passed your course.
Oh, good, good. Glad to.
Credit
Okay.
for next time you're doing a Taos lecture.
Say again?
Credit toward the next time you do a Taos lecture.
Well, wonderful. And I so encourage, if you haven't already, to pick up, I mean, Jim, you've written several books, and I'm sure they're all wonderful. I've only read the one on the calendar that you've written, but it is wonderful. So if you have more you'd like to learn about it, I encourage you to look at that. And we are just so grateful for all the time, for all the passion that you put into this, and for being a part of our Taos Lecture Series this year. And we so look forward to having you come back, quiz or no quiz, next year to do the second half of this. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you. You're welcome.
And thank you,
It was-
Diane, for
it
all
was
of
my
your help as
pleasure.
well.
Bye, everybody.